The following podcast is brought to you by the Station of the Cross. Thank you for listening.
Change our home life. Change the way we educate our children.
It is the presence of God He promised to leave. I will not leave you orphans.
Dear brothers and sisters, the Holy Spirit is with you.
Praise be Jesus Christ. This is Father Robert McTague of the Society of Jesus, your daily host for the Catholic Current, where we plug into the power of Jesus Christ and His Catholic Church. You're listening to us on the Station of the Cross Catholic Radio Network and the iCatholic Radio app, where we proclaim the fullness of truth with clarity and charity. As always, let's begin with prayer. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Almighty God, we give you thanks for your goodness and mercy and love through the intercession of St. Ignatius Loyola. We ask that you pour forth your Holy Spirit upon us, a spirit of discernment who may hear your voice and obey your command. We make this prayer through Christ our Lord. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Our topic today is, can God still be found? And we have a most distinguished guest to address that question with us. Professor of philosophy, a renowned Catholic scholar, an author of innumerable books, someone whose books I read as a student with great profit, benefited using his books in the classroom as a professor, and an author whose books I still enjoy. In fact, at lunch today, I just reread his latest book, which is Doors in the Walls of the World, Signs of Transcendence in the Human Story. Please welcome Dr. Peter Kreeft of Boston College. Dr. Kreeft, thank you. Welcome to the Catholic Current.
Thank you for having me, Father McTague.
It's a real pleasure. It's an answer to prayer. I'm very excited. I raised the question of can God still be found, because we live in times that I think can aptly be described as dark. And I've had people ask me, Father, is God hiding? Has God left the building? Or is God as present as He's ever been, and we've just become numb to Him? What do you say?
The answer is very clear. God is still here. The question is, are we hiding? Can God find us? Of course we can find Him. He lets Himself be found. He invites, seek and you shall find. That's a solemn promise.
Yes. And so what's keeping us from letting ourselves be found?
Well, it's a certain thing that began with a snake and an apple in a garden many, many years ago.
And someone told him he was naked.
It original sin.
Yes. Is there anything in particular about our culture and our way of proceeding in these days that lends itself to avoiding God or hiding God or failing to be alert to God?
Well, certainly. For the last 500 years, we've been declining into a more and more secularized culture. Christianity is, in most places in the world, a private option, and it is not structuring our culture and our society as it used to.
So the faith revealed to us by the Christ of God is kind of an optional accessory if one is so inclined, but otherwise dispensable. And I think the illusion is that we can dispense from the revelation of God without consequence.
Yeah. The question, is it objectively true? Is it reality? Is seldom asked. The question instead is, do you like it? Is it good for you? Well, all right, we'll tolerate that.
Well, I'm sure that you've been in more undergraduate classrooms than I have, but I'm sure you've heard someone say, well, you know, Dr. Kreeft, you have your reality and I have my reality, and who's to say which reality is better and who's right and who's wrong? What's been your response to that over the years?
Well, I wouldn't directly say that to a poor, badly educated student.
Well, no.
I'll say it to you. That's insanity. To say that reality is my reality, that's pretty much the definition of insanity.
Yes, it is.
If I say I'm a butterfly, I'm a butterfly. If as a man I say I'm a woman, I'm a woman. If I say I'm God, I'm God.
Well, I've told students, as you have your reality, I have my reality. Well, why is it that in your reality and my reality, water boils at the same temperature, alcohol and chocolate are fattening, and why, oh why, did you ever pick a reality where the cutoff for an A in this class is a 95?
Yes, I had a class once that tended to be relativist and say that. So I said, well, okay, I'll adopt your point of view. And since I am the authority in this class, all the men get an A and all the women get an F. Oh, but that's not fair. What do you mean by fair? Well, fair is just a subjective opinion. Good. Okay, I'll go by my subjective opinion and I'll impose it upon you. They didn't like that.
Well, no, or the attempt at cultural imperialism, that there are some things I can't understand because I'm not a member of whatever they define as a culture. And I said, well,
the crazy thing is that educated philosophers often believe that. That's the essence of postmodernism and deconstructionism. There is nothing but power.
Yes.
Justice and truth are simply the words that we arbitrarily paint on whatever power we have.
Right. And it would be silly if it weren't so dangerous and deadly. I have to.
Fortunately, ordinary people don't believe that. I think you have to have a PhD to seriously believe that.
Yes, you do. I once told students, I said, the reason I don't go to philosophy conferences anymore is you get the invitation that says, please come to Desperate State University, which is a line I borrowed from you, by the way, I believe. Come to Desperate State University to hear Dr. Jones's talk on how there's no reality apart from his own mind. Please let us know how many are coming so that we can arrange for luncheon and valet parking. And it's complete nonsense.
There is actually a philosophical society called the Solipsist Society. I don't know whether they realize the humor and the irony or whether they were serious.
For our listeners, a solipsist is from the Latin solus ipse, all alone by oneself. So a solipsist is someone who's convinced of his own reality and nothing else. So I like to tell students, I've met lots of solipsists. I don't think they ever knew it. That's my attempt to add.
That's a line worthy of Stephen Wright, the great philosophical comedian.
Well, thank you. I will take that as a badge of honor. I've had students say to me that they would come from state schools to Catholic schools, and there's some attempt at taking philosophy seriously in self-identified Catholic schools these days. But I've had students say, "Oh, Father, in my philosophy class at State University, a professor would point to the chair and tell the student, describe the chair." And the student would say, "What chair?" And the professor would say, "Exactly." And then everyone would applaud. Do you believe people pay money for this?
Well, P.T. Barnum said there's a sucker born every minute. And nobody got broke underestimating the American intelligence. So.
Well, that's true, too. But, these are 17-year-old kids who can't buy a beer, but they're signing student loans for $50,000 a year. I wonder if it's not a form of child abuse in some way. Well, Dr. Kreeft, you've been teaching much, much longer than I have. How do you keep your spirits up with the, I think, growing obtuseness in academia these days?
Well, in my experience, all of us have both intellectual and moral gifts and defects. We're all handicapped in different ways. I am very lazy, and I have ADD. That's one of my handicaps. But I have a pretty good sense of humor, so that's one of my gifts.
Okay, that's a way of rolling forward. Survive. Oh my goodness, yes, that's certainly true. I think it was Camus who said any idiot can survive a crisis. It's the little things that'll make you crazy. Mm-hmm. Do you have a sense of mission when you go into the classroom, or are you just an honest man who thinks aloud and trying to be honest?
I'm a missionary with a spy's cover. Spy's cover is philosophy professor.
Okay.
I'm trying to sneak Christianity back into Christendom.
Oh my goodness! To get them to eat their broccoli without letting them know that it's broccoli. Well, if you're found out, there could be awkward consequences. I imagine that there was a time when there would be at least some basic nods of recognition, as you said. You say things, do good or avoid evil, love your kids, don't eat grandma. Do you have?
Unfortunately, I'm teaching at a school that is still fairly Catholic and fairly sane, and
good.
in a very good philosophy department. So, in the average state university, there are pockets of sanity in an insane institution. At Boston College, there are just pockets of insanity in a basically sane institution.
Oh my goodness, that's a very rare privilege indeed. How fortunate you are, because it seems that sometimes at the university the lunatics have taken over the asylum. When I was a new priest and I was teaching at a self-described Catholic university, and I was on the committee to rewrite the mission statement, and someone handed me the draft of the mission statement, and I said, I noticed that you used the word diversity 3 times and the word truth not at all. And people looked at each other very nervously, as if to ask, who's going to tell him? And I thought, is my nose running? Do I have spinach between my teeth? And they talked to me very slowly, as if I were mentally challenged. He said, Father, truth is divisive. Owie, hot, burn, no. And I said, well, if that's true, you just spent $60 million on a new library which carved in stone. The truth will set you free. Should I get some spackle from Home Depot and fill that in for you? Mm-hmm. And then mysteriously, I wasn't on the committee anymore.
Surprise, surprise.
Surprise, surprise.
Well, one of the pockets of insanity that I will tell you about has something to do with diversity. Somebody made a survey of political allegiances in different prestigious universities, including Boston College, and they found that 100% of all of the faculty and administrators who contributed their own time and money to either party in the last year were Democrats. 100% Democrats, 0% Republican. So the Boston Globe sent a reporter to BC to get reactions to this, and somebody in the theology department, I just don't know who, when appraised of the fact that 100% were Democrats, he said, I'm very proud of that. You see, we believe in diversity. I don't think he saw the irony.
Well, no.
Means you vote for Democrats.
Malcolm Muggeridge said we've reached a point in our culture where there's no point in doing irony anymore. When we come back, we're going to address the question, is God only for people who can't cope with the real world? And you want to be part of the conversation, I'm sure. Call us now at 1-877-511-5483. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Tune in weekdays from 6 to 7 a.m. Eastern for Sermons for Everyday Living. There's no better way to start your day than with spiritual formation from inspiring priests. For details about upcoming episodes and for podcasts of past shows, visit thestationofthecross.com and click on Sermons for Everyday Living under the Programs tab. That's Sermons for Everyday Living, weekdays from 6 to 7 a.m. Eastern on the Station of the Cross.
Showing compassion around the world.
This is a special commentary from the Susan B. Anthony List, named for the suffragette who was proudly pro-life.
The Child Survival Program, an arm of Compassion International, is making a difference in the lives of baby girls in India. By providing nutritional food, supplements, and training in how to care for an infant, Compassion workers encourage parents to bring their baby girls into the world, even though Indian culture has a strong preference for boys. And they offer hope if parents simply cannot care for a child. One worker in Bangalore, India, reports, "We have saved 4 baby girls from certain death by persuading the parents to give up these girls for adoption."
This is Marjorie Dannenfelser, president of the Susan B. Anthony List. For more about our work to mobilize and advance pro-life women in politics, visit our website at sba-list.org.
Did you know that by 12 weeks of development, a fetus's arms have grown enough to reach their final proportion relative to body size? Also, at this stage of growth, the entire body surface of the fetus, except the top of the head and back, will react to a light touch. This stage also marks the end of the first trimester of the constantly growing fetus. Human life is sacred. Think about it. CoalitionForLife.com.
You're listening to the Station of the Cross Catholic Radio Network. Call into the Catholic Current this hour at 1-877-511-5483. Each morning, the Catholic Current sends out a short survey on the topic for today's show so that you can share your thoughts and any questions you might have. This is a great way to participate, especially if you aren't able to call in live. A few of the responses will be read over the air to add to the discussion, so make sure you sign up to receive our emailed survey at thestationofthecross.com.
Praise be Jesus Christ. This is Father Robert McTague of the Society of Jesus, your daily host on the Catholic Current, where we plug into the power of Jesus Christ and His Catholic Church. You're listening to us on the Station of the Cross Catholic Radio Network and the iCatholic Radio app, where we proclaim the fullness of truth with clarity and charity. Our question today is, can God still be found? And our most distinguished guest is Dr. Peter Kreeft of Boston College. I urge you to look for his latest book called Doors in the Walls of the World, Signs of Transcendence in the Human Story. Dr. Kreeft, our question in this segment is God only for people who can't cope with the real world? Now, on the one hand, the word God often elicits eye rolls from people from different philosophical schools, or anti-philosophical schools, better said. And regarding the real world, that's a funny phrase, isn't it? You know, I've had lots of students, as I'm sure you have too, sit in the classroom, point out the window and say, well, you know, in the real world. And I say, no, that's the realm of common experience. The real world is what we're trying to find here in this philosophy class. How would you address the question of the real world and God's place in it?
Well, I would agree with every word in your sentence except one.
Okay.
You have said that God is for people who can't live in the real world. I would say atheism is for people who can't live in the real world.
Uh-huh.
The only honest reason for believing in God is that He's real.
Right. Right. And yet, in the 20th century, Freud would say, well, clearly you've just got father issues, or God is just the security blanket. Doesn't that suggest a misunderstanding of God? I mean, doesn't the Christian tradition say it is a terrible thing to fall into the hands of a living God?
Yes. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, one of the great Jewish scholars of the 20th century, was once translating an old text, and a student was in the room, and he opined, "Oh, Rabbi, it must be wonderful to live your life in the presence of the Scriptures, because they're about God. It must be a great comfort to you." And he rose, all 6 feet 6 inches with red hair, and said, "Comfort. Let me translate the sentence that I just read from this 11th century rabbi. God," he said, "is not nice. God is not an uncle. God is an earthquake."
Well, yes, of course. Again, part of that original sin, trying to flee from God. If you know that you are going to come before a transcendent being over whom you have no leverage, someone who is infinitely penetrating in His vision and who is absolutely holy, and at the same time you have no sense of hope and mercy, then coping with God becomes unbearable, doesn't it?
Yes, I think a very common reason for turning away from religion is you get a half-truth. You get the bad news without the good news. You get God's justice without His mercy.
Right.
You get His truth without His love.
Right.
And in reaction against that, many so-called religious people want to say, well, no to truth, but yes to love. And no to justice, but yes to mercy, and make him a comfortable chum.
Right. And
Freud
then
was at least honest enough and tough-minded enough to admit that either atheists or theists are insane. They're living in the unreal world, an illusion.
Right. Right.
If God is the most real thing, then not to acknowledge them is insanity. For Freud, it's the opposite. Religious people are literally insane. They're playing with invisible childhood friends still when they're adults.
Right. Now, I've known people who claim to be advocates of science, which I think is different from being a scientist. But certain advocates of science say that it's the empirical science that deal with the really real, and that if you're talking about God, you might as well be talking about Thor or Zeus or the flying spaghetti monster. If you can't measure it, or if you can't touch it or taste it, then you have no business calling it real.
Well, if the really real is what's empirical, then your body is more real than your soul, and your epidermis is more important than your conscience, and the person is really just a bunch of atoms that's pretending to be a mind.
Right, and if the only thing that matters is matter, why would something that's just a body get upset if I walk away with its wallet? It doesn't make any sense. I mean, if we're just bags of nerve endings and appetites waiting to be tickled and fed, why would we bother contending over matters of truth? I rather like the existentialists and even the pragmatists who insist that a valid test of a philosophical idea is, can it be lived? Right. Right.
It's too insane to be lived, especially if it's lived in the face of death. Can a philosophy be believed on your deathbed? If not, that disqualifies it.
Right. Well, my mentor in philosophy was the late, great Paul Weiss, and that was always his question.
He was a good tough-minded guy,
Yeah. So, I grew up in a rough neighborhood philosophically, but he would always ask, can it be lived? Can it be lived? And his books would go back and forth between the highest level of abstractions and then something nitty-gritty like philosophy of sport. And I just submitted a book to a publisher with the immodest title of Real Philosophy for Real People. Well, let's shift the discussion a little bit. I agree with you that the naturalist argument doesn't really hold. What about the other great argument against the existence of God, the problem of evil? Take whatever horror you care to name, however grand or penetrating or small, and say, how could a good God allow X, Y, Z? How would you begin to respond to that?
Excuse me, that's a much more serious argument,
right?
Because the materialist has no argument at all. He just claims that he can explain everything without anything spiritual, which doesn't disprove the existence of God. But evil seems to. If there's a God who has infinite power and infinite goodness, why is there any evil at all?
Right.
So this is one of the reasons why religion requires faith. Mm-hmm. If God's a person, the fundamental relationship between persons is trust. Mm-hmm. It's not an empirical relation, although that's a dimension of it.
Right.
And no empirical science has ever refuted any religious dogma in the history of the world.
Mm-hmm.
But evil threatens faith, threatens trust. It looks like God is letting us down. Mm-hmm. And the only possible answer to that question is, well, you're not God. And you don't know what he's doing, and you can believe that all these evils are allowed by God for reasons that are perfectly wise and good and loving. Even the sufferings in your life that you don't understand, they make you stronger, they make you wiser in the end, but you're not at the end yet, so you don't see it.
Right. Well, from a logical point of view, if you had a continuum of, the perfect knowledge of God and, the absolute ignorance of a rock, the first question would be, where is human knowing on that scale? I would say it's really hard to plot where that is. And the second is, where would human knowing have to be in order to be sure that any instance of evil is disproving of the existence of God? So just from the viewpoint of human knowledge... It would have to be on a divine level.
Right. If we could, with certainty, disprove the existence of God by all that we knew about evil, that would prove the existence of God, because we have divine knowledge.
Right. And I would say that it's difficult to talk about the existence of evil at all unless there is a transcendent standard of goodness that evil falls short of. I mean, if evil really triumphs and the world is absurd, then there's no morality at all. So you might have the fact of pain, but you'd no longer have the problem of evil. Yeah, we have no authority to judge it as absurd. It's light that illuminates darkness, not vice versa. Dr. Kreeft, we just got a text from an anonymous listener. It said, can Dr. Kreeft explain the ontological argument for God's existence as put forth by St. Anselm? And specifically, how is it more perfect for a hypothetical God to exist than not to exist? I think you've probably read student essays to that effect a few thousand times. Well, that's a fairly easy question to answer, but it's not an easy argument to evaluate because it seems perfectly logical, and yet instinctively we know there's a fallacy in it somewhere. The argument goes like this. Atheists and theists have to have a common definition of God in order to communicate. So let's define God as the being that lacks no conceivable perfection. All right. Now, that means he can't lack power, he can't lack wisdom, he can't lack justice. What about independence of a human mind? Is it more perfect to exist as a mere dream in my mind, or is it more perfect to exist as an independent entity? Obviously, independence of the mind is more perfect than dependence on a mind. So if God doesn't have that perfection, he's not God. But you admitted that God was God, like Zeus is Zeus, or the spaghetti monster is the spaghetti monster. So it logically follows that God must have objective, independent existence outside the human mind, because that's one of the perfections. Right. That seems logical. The problem is you're going from a thought to a thing. Yes. And in order to have evidence for the existence of one thing, you have to start with another thing. The thought is just a copy of a thing, for us anyway. So you can't go from a human thought to a real thing. You have to do something about it. Well, so you know, it's a very clever argument, but it doesn't work. Well, yeah, it deserves to work. You know, I first read Anselm when I was 18 years old, and the professor then said, on odd number days it seems to work, on an even number days it doesn't seem to work, and I really do wish it did work. So Bertrand Russell said something like that. He was an atheist almost all of his life, and he said, once I was a theist for about 10 minutes. I read the ontological argument, and I said, by gum, it's valid. And I rushed home to write about it, and once I got home, I forgot. When we come back, we're going to ask the question, why should Christians care about philosophy? We want you to be part of the conversation. Get on the line to call us now, 1-877-511-5483. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
The Station of the Cross invites you to join us each day for the Liturgy of the Hours at 5 a.m., 3 p.m., and 9:30 p.m. Eastern. The Liturgy of the Hours is the daily prayer of the Church and is made up of readings from sacred scripture, writings from saints and theologians, and small reflections. For details about each hour and more information about the Liturgy of the Hours, visit thestationofthecross.com. We hope you'll join us for this daily prayer of the Church each day at 5 a.m., 3 p.m., and 9:30 p.m. Eastern, right here on the Station of the Cross.
This is Lavinia Spirito for Catholic Way Bible Study. When Jesus says in the Beatitudes, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God," He is blessing those of us who are coherent and consistent and committed in our faith from the inside out. The commitment we have in our hearts is readily observable in our behavior. No duplicity, no hypocrisy. The Catechism of the Catholic Church says there are those who have attuned their intellects and wills to the demands of God's holiness and are pure in heart, body, and faith. No compromises, no straddling the fence, no being someone in church and someone entirely different in the world. Purity of heart is a precondition for the vision of God. Purity of heart calls us to full integration of God's kingdom in our whole lives. Are you sold out for the Lord?
Catholic Way Bible Study. Peace, power, purpose. Find out more at cwbs.org.
I might have gone to church, at Christmas time, gradually quit going. It's not as scary as I thought it was. It's a much more warm and open place, and God really is about love. It's not about the rules and the things that I remember as a young child. It really is about the love that God has for each one of us that's so deep and wonderful.
If you've been away from the Catholic Church for any reason, visit CatholicsComeHome.org.
You're listening to the Station of the Cross Catholic Radio Network. Call in to the Catholic Current this hour at 1-877-511-5483. If you miss any portion of today's show or want to listen to any past episodes, click the podcast link under the Programs tab at the top of our homepage, thestationofthecross.com.
Praise be Jesus Christ. This is Father Robert McTague of the Society of Jesus, your daily host for the Catholic Current, where we plug into the power of Jesus Christ and His Catholic Church. You're listening to us on the Station of the Cross Catholic Radio Network and the iCatholic Radio app, where we proclaim the fullness of truth with clarity and charity. Our topic today is, can God still be found? Our most distinguished guest is Dr. Peter Kreeft of Boston College. I urge you to read his very charming latest book called Doors in the Walls of the World, Signs of Transcendence in the Human Story. Dr. Kreeft, in this segment, I'd like to talk about why should Christians care about philosophy? And of course, that's a very old question. Wasn't it Tertullian who said, what has the church to do with the academy? What has the Jerusalem to do with Athens? Is philosophy just an indulgent distraction for people who have time on their hands?
Well, Tertullian died a heretic outside the church. The Church's position has always been that faith and reason are the two lungs with which the Church breathes, or the two wings with which the bird flies. Faith and reason are utterly compatible. They're both ways of knowing truth. If you mean by philosophy the love of wisdom rather than just the cultivation of cleverness, then philosophy is implicitly a search for God.
Right,
in Augustine's Confessions, he reads Cicero's Hortensius, which is an invitation to philosophy, and he says, that was my first conversion. I didn't believe in the Christian God at the time, but I discovered a divine attribute, divine wisdom. Wisdom is worth having for its own sake. It's an absolute. And I think Augustine, if he had died at that time, would have gone to heaven, even though his theology was skewered, because he was totally in love with his heart, with that which God is. One of the things God is wisdom. There is love.
What would you say to a Christian who says, well, I'm just anxious about studying philosophy after, say, 1274, the death of Aquinas, because it all seems to have been full of mischief. Is the study of even unsympathetic anti-Christian philosophy, is there a possible benefit in that, or is it just, should we treat it like so much radioactive material?
Most things that have great power for good also have great power for evil. Philosophy is one of those things. And we shouldn't be like scared rabbits who jump back into our holes rather than exploring the big, wide, wicked world. Right. We appreciate truth best by contrasting it with error. So once you're firmly grounded in the truth, look at all the erroneous philosophies. They'll help your faith rather than harm it.
So I noticed you said once you're first grounded in truth, if you were going to have kind of the ideal 18-year-old everyman going to a sound Catholic college and he's coming into philosophy class for the first time, what would you like for him to have already read or thought about or experienced so that he could best benefit?
There's a very concrete and very clear answer to that question. Socrates.
Okay. Socrates. Okay.
The utterly honest, passionate, open-minded searcher after truth.
Right.
If you've got Socrates in your mind, he'll be the possible correction for all wrong paths. He's not infallible, but if you're like Socrates, Socrates gave his life for what he believed was the truth.
Right.
He was the opposite of a relativist. The dialogues of Plato are a great introduction to philosophy. They're profound, and they're witty, and they're brilliantly written.
They're captivating. And I remember reading The Myth of the Cave when I was 18 years old, and I said, why did anyone bother to write after that? The Myth of the Caves, it just seems to explain just about everything.
Yep.
And I saw that even at 18.
A famous philosopher, I think it was Sidney Hook, in his autobiography, says that he was a school dropout and he went to the New York 42nd Street Public Library all the time and read books, and somebody said, read Plato's Republic, and he did. He didn't understand it all, but when he came to the parable of the cave, he said, that's me. If that's what a philosopher is, I'm going to be a philosopher. It was a conversion.
Well, no, it is very compelling, and it was such a grace for me as a doctoral student meeting Paul Weiss, who, if I believed in reincarnation, I would say that he was the reincarnation of Socrates. He was a relentless, fearless questioner, and he had
Socrates
a true...
on the Lower East Side of New York, maybe, yeah.
Exactly. I said it was like if Socrates were in a Mel Brooks movie, that's what Paul Weiss would have sounded like, but he had that passion for knowing the truth, and he was as ready to be corrected as he was to be correct. Dr. Kreeft, we have a text from one of our listeners, Edward, who asks, in Dr. Kreeft's opinion, what is the best argument for God's existence that doesn't depend on religion?
Read the Gospels. Meet Jesus. If God doesn't exist, Jesus is the stupidest man in the world.
Well, that was brief.
Yep.
Right. It's either Jesus is telling the truth, or he's a madman, or he's a devil.
It depends on your personality, which argument impresses you the best.
Right.
I'm often surprised by how many people like the aesthetic argument. In the Handbook of Christian Apologetics, which Father Cicely and I together wrote, we have 24 arguments for the existence of God. The shortest one is this: there is the music of Bach, therefore there must be a God.
Right.
That's the argument my students like the best. In fact, I know 3 ex-atheists who were converted by the music of Bach. They
Is
said,
that right?
In a godless universe, that could not exist.
Oh, my goodness. Well, I would say to Edward, why is there something rather than nothing? I mean, do we really want to say in the beginning there was nothing, then it exploded, and eventually there was something? And if every feature of existence is not absolutely necessary, then somehow it's dependent, it's contingent. Contingent upon what? And then you can start pulling on the thread and tracing your way back. I remember as an undergraduate, Dr. Kreeft, reading Pieper's wonderful book, Leisure, the Basis of Culture. And he opened a line from Aquinas, and I can't remember where it is in Aquinas, but Aquinas said that a philosopher may be likened unto a poet in this way: both are concerned with the marvelous. Now, I know in your book, Doors in the Walls of the World, you speak about poetry. Can you address that link between philosophy and wonder and poetry?
Philosophy begins in wonder, and not just in the intellectual wonder, that's curiosity, but in the more instinctive wonder at looking at the world and saying, wow, there's something there. Why? That instinctive, or if you will, heart wonder or emotional wonder always leads to intellectual wonder. Well, let's figure it out. And if you get an answer, that leads to an even higher kind of wonder, namely admiration. How wonderful it is. So one kind of wonder just matures into another kind. That's philosophy. And in my book, I don't argue that much for transcendence, but I just paint a lot of pictures. I show more than tell. What does the world look like? What does the human story look like if there are doors in the walls of the world, and if what we see is just the epidermis of reality, and if Shakespeare is right when he says there are more things in heaven and earth that are dreamed of in all the philosophies.
Well, right. Your book, Doors in the Walls of the World, as it's not a rigorous chain of syllogisms, not at all. But there is something wonderfully human about it. Pay attention to ordinary human experience. Begin to reflect deeply, and let your physical eyes and the eyes of your mind and the eyes of your heart be open, and then deeper reality will almost inevitably seep in. Have I read that correctly in your book? Am I understanding you correctly there?
Yep.
Okay.
That's why I like concrete images more than abstract arguments.
Right.
Nothing wrong with the abstract,
right.
But we're much more persuaded by the concrete.
Right. So could you talk a little bit about the relationship between poetry and philosophy?
Well, it depends on what you mean by poetry and what you mean by philosophy. If what you mean by poetry is what most modern poets are writing nowadays, namely unintelligible stuff that they admire each other for, and if you mean by philosophy just a scholarship to get tenure, there's no relation at all.
Right.
But if you mean by philosophy the love of wisdom, and if you mean by poetry an insight through words and sounds into how wonderful the world is, then they're natural allies.
And I think there is something about the charm of poetry that affects the memory on a deep level and can be a point of reference when we're in a great deal of pain or confusion.
Is that I fell in love with poetry in high school, especially philosophical poetry like T.S. Eliot. And then in college, I realized that you could get deeper into what I found as the heart of poetry, namely wisdom and insight through philosophy. So they definitely are natural allies.
And it's unfortunate that academic philosophy can be so deadly dull that it can be stifling. I mean, there's a whole body of literature on commenting a particular paragraph of Wittgenstein and how many semicolons he used within a given space and so on. And meanwhile, people are living and dying and giving birth and winning fortunes and losing fortunes. How did academic philosophy become so distanced from the original earthiness of Socrates?
That's a good question. Partly specialization, partly the adoration of scientific method and quantification, and partly just the social and economic structure of philosophy. Philosophy is used as one of the departments in a university. For Socrates, philosophy is not a department. Philosophy is about life.
Right.
There was a study made of how many people throughout the world read the average learned article in a peer-reviewed international philosophy journal that had at least 5,000 readers that it was sent to. And the answer was 6.
Oh my goodness.
These articles are not written to be read.
Of course not.
Except by the superiors of the people who write them so that they can grant them promotion and tenure.
Well, yeah, there seems to, someone once told me that novelty is the lust of the theologian. I think publication can be the lust of the academic philosopher, not because it's doing anybody any good, but it's just another line on the resume, kind of a notch on the belt.
But that's how we get a job, and that's how we get money, and that's how we eat. You know the difference between a large pizza and a philosopher, don't you?
No.
A large pizza can feed a family of 4.
When we come back, we're going to look at 3 philosophies of life and how to choose among them. Get on the phone now, 1-877-511-5483. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
A map in a mirror. That's how we can view the life and legacy of Archbishop Fulton Sheen. We can look to Archbishop Sheen's faithful witness to the Lord as a guide, helping us to better share our faith with others. And we can hold up our own faithful witness to the Lord, asking how our lives might better reflect Jesus to a world so in need of Him.
And after the mind of the call, there came to the mind of proclamation by radio, books, television, delighting and rejoicing in the mission of proclaiming Christ the Son of God.
Archbishop Timothy Dolan.
There has never been a man so able to present the timeless teachings of Catholicism to a world that sometimes maybe is skeptical at best and sometimes downright hostile. You can't go wrong in looking at Fulton J. Sheen because he managed to do it.
To find out more about the faithful witness of Archbishop Fulton Sheen, visit FultonSheenMission.org.
This is the Pope Paul VI Institute Minute with Dr. Tom Hilgers.
The Church spoke directly to me in the challenges of Humanae Vitae. My personal and professional life were changed forever. One physician in the book Physicians Healed wrote, quote, Humanae Vitae made so much sense, I committed myself to cease providing contraceptive service and to promote natural family planning. This book has received numerous other testimonies that read like this one about the lives and practices being changed because of the truth of Humanae Vitae. The next generation of physicians who have accepted Humanae Vitae and have discovered nanotechnology are making the decision to dedicate their professional career to science that cooperates with natural regulation of fertility. They will not make the same mistakes as my generation, which accepted the birth control pill as a cover-all symptoms measure. The commitment of these new physicians is truly inspiring.
For a complimentary gift and more information on the Pope Paul VI Institute, log on to www.popepaul6, that's Roman numeral 6.com.
You're listening to the Station of the Cross Catholic Radio Network. Call into the Catholic Current this hour at 1-877-511-5483. Shortly after today's show, visit our page for the Catholic Current at thestationofthecross.com. Here you'll find a link to Father McTague's recommended reading list and a link for downloading the program so that you can share it with your family and friends.
Praise be Jesus Christ. This is Father Robert McTague of the Society of Jesus, your daily host for the Catholic Current, where we plug into the power of Jesus Christ and His Catholic Church. You're listening to us on the Station of the Cross Catholic Radio Network and the iCatholic Radio app, where we proclaim the fullness of truth with clarity and charity. Our topic today is, Can God Still Be Found? Our most distinguished guest is Dr. Peter Kreeft of Boston College. His latest book, which I urge you to read, is called Doors in the Walls of the World, Signs of Transcendence in the Human Story. And we want you to be part of the conversation. Get on the phone now, 1-877-511-5483, or text us at the same number at 1-877-511-5483. Dr. Kreeft, in this segment, we're going to look at three philosophies of life. Now, I know some years ago you wrote a book called Three Philosophies of Life, and it was about life as vanity, life as suffering, life as love. But in this book, Doors in the Walls of the World, it's different. You talk about moreness, lessness, and sameness, and then relabel them as mysticism, reductionism, and rationalism. What can you tell us about those?
Well, I start with Hamlet saying to Horatio, there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamed of in your philosophy. Things in heaven and earth I take to mean objective reality. And things in your philosophy I take to mean what's in your mind. Mm-hmm. So is most of the stuff in your mind myth and fallacy and fiction? And is the world less than you think it is? Or is most of the stuff in your mind radically inadequate to the reality and the wonder of the world? Or are they exactly the same, so that you know it all? So what's the relation between your thought and the real world? Which one is bigger? And the only happy and sane philosophy is Shakespeare's. There's always more in the world than in your thought. The arrogant rationalist says, well, everything that I think is real, and whatever is real I think. And the typically modern skeptic and cynic says, no, most of what we think is fake, and the world is much less than we think.
Well, you know, it's funny. There was a book called Naming the Elephant. I think it was by John Sire, and it was about the concept of worldviews. And he said one way to prove that a skeptic isn't really a skeptic is if he's wearing his tweed jacket and holding his cocktail, and he has his elbow up on the mantelpiece talking about how, you know, the world is all an illusion. You just go up to him and whisper and say, "Excuse me, sir, your fly is open." And if he looks,
he
then you know
doesn't believe in the real world. Why does he bother to look? That's right.
So there are some very, very practical tests in that. What is the appeal of the unreal? I mean, you know, you and I are philosophers. You and I are Christians. We know and accept, and in our better moments, at least revel in that we're not God, and only God is God. What is the appeal of skepticism or the arrogance of rationalism?
if you're bigger than the world is smaller than you are. Right. And whatever is smaller than you are, you can control. Mm-hmm. If not with your body, at least with your mind, you can define it. You can get around it. Nothing mystical. Mm-hmm. Mysticism is scary. It literally blows your mind apart, makes it bigger.
Right.
Getting out of Plato's cave is scary. There's a whole new world out there. Getting born is scary. The womb is comfortable.
Mm-hmm. So there's a loss of familiar. There's a loss of control, and ultimately, I would have to think that a rationalist or a skeptic must be lonely.
Yeah.
There is even human friendship must be poorer, but there's no awareness of being loved or provided for, in the context of a very great story. I find that very sad.
Well, even an atheist doesn't have to be a materialist. He can believe in human friendship and love, and that lasts for a little while, but then comes death and it all goes down the drain. So ultimately there's no hope. So he can believe that there's many things that are beautiful, but everything is not beautiful because everything is ultimately nothing.
Paul Weiss, my mentor in philosophy, he described himself as an agnostic Jewish metaphysician. His son Jonathan, a good friend of mine, describes himself as an atheist. And I said, Jonathan, that can't be true. I said, you need my metaphysics to ground your ethics. I said, you're a better man than what your metaphysics can account for. And he made faces and harumphed, but I don't know that he gave me a very satisfactory answer.
The problem with being an atheist is that you're making the metaphysical judgment that in all of reality there is no being worthy of the name of God. And that presupposes that you know every corner of reality. In other words, that you're God.
Right. And I think part of the appeal is that if death is final and there is no God, then there is no morality, then there's no possibility of failure. And there's no possibility of judgment, and I think
ultimately not. Right. No, just the little games we play.
Right.
We make the rules, and that's all there is. But you can't take it with ultimate seriousness, right?
Well, I tell my students in terms of worldviews, the only honest people are theists and nihilists. I said, Nietzsche was crazy, but at least he was honest and he knew what he was doing. Whereas,
let me change that a little bit. He was consistent.
Okay.
He was ruthlessly logical.
Right.
If there's no God, he reasoned, there's no truth. So he questioned the very will to truth.
Right. And then there's nothing left but the will to power.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas, I would say it's either the madness of Nietzsche or the clarity of theism, and everything else is just hand-waving and whistling past the cemetery.
Or as C.S. Lewis put in one of his poems addressed to Satan, God is, thou art, the rest delusion.
Oh. Well, it's funny how these philosophers, keep coming back to God. I'm sure you've heard the old quip that, philosophy is a blind man in a dark room looking for a black cat that isn't there, and theology is a blind man in a dark room looking for a black cat who isn't there, who finds the cat. How do we answer the objection that the search for God, the search for wisdom, is a kind of wish fulfillment?
Well, it is a wish fulfillment because if God designed our souls, then our hearts are unhappy until they have God and until our deepest wishes and need for God is fulfilled. But that doesn't prove that God doesn't exist. Our innate desires and what revealed religion shows God to be are indeed suspiciously similar. Like a hand and a glove. The question is, was the glove made to fit the hand, or was the hand made to fit the glove?
Mm-hmm. Well, didn't St. Louis say, if there's thirst, there must be water, and if there's food, if there's hunger, there must be food. Unless we live in an absurd world, this desire for satisfaction, this desire to be made full, this desire to move beyond not just knowing true things, but truth itself, the desire not to just love good things, but to love goodness itself, the desire not just to delight in beauty, but ultimately to delight in beauty itself. Could it really be, could we live in a meaningful world where all those desires have no possibility of fulfillment?
I've had a lot of conversations with atheists, and I think the argument they fear the most is that one. Because when I give them that argument for desire, every natural, innate, universal human desire does correspond to a real object, whether you can attain it or not. There can't be a desire for something that simply doesn't exist. And there is a natural desire for God and heaven. You would rather that there be a heaven, you'd rather that there be a God than that it's all empty, right? And therefore it doesn't follow that this does exist. Every time I give them that argument, they say, yes, it's perfectly logical, but it has a false premise. I recognize no such desire for God. I don't want God to exist. I don't want to go to heaven.
I don't understand that. I don't know how that
either. I don't either. I don't either. They know their logic very well, but they don't know their heart. They don't know their psychology. They're suppressing it. The human heart was not designed at Harvard. It was designed in heaven.
I won't ask you which direction you're facing as you say that, Dr. Kreeft, because I know you're in the Boston area. Dr. Kreeft, in the minute we have left, could you offer our listeners an exhortation towards the pursuit of Christian wisdom?
I will offer only Christ's exhortation, seek and you shall find. I don't think he was talking about winning the lottery. I don't think he was talking about getting a desired job. I don't even think he was talking about minimizing your pains and maximizing your pleasures. He's talking about his Father.
Yes.
And the two attributes of God that stand out the most are that God is love and that God is truth. Yes. Nobody wants to be stupid and nobody wants to be hated. We all want to exist in truth and in love. And his promise is, if we seek that which God is, even if we're agnostics, we'll find it somehow, somewhere.
Yes. I want to thank my guest this evening, Dr. Peter Kreeft of Boston College, distinguished philosopher and scholar. His most recent book I urge you to get, Doors in the Walls of the World, Signs of Transcendence in the Human Story. Thank you very much, Dr. Kreeft. I'm Father Robert McTague, your daily host here on the Catholic Current. Jesuit Happy was very to be of service to you. Through the intercession of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, may God our Lord protect you from all harm and every evil, until you reach the happiness of heaven. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, go in peace. Please pray for me.
Thank you for listening to this podcast brought to you by the Station of the Cross. The Station of the Cross is a listener-funded nonprofit organization. If this podcast has helped you in your spiritual journey, please consider making a donation. Donations can be made through our website, thestationofthecross.com, or by calling 1-877-888-6279. You can also donate right through our free iCatholic Radio mobile app. Thank you for listening to and supporting the Station of the Cross, proclaiming the fullness of truth with clarity and charity.